The year is 1220. The air inside the Grand Mosque of Bukhara does not smell of incense or prayer. It chokes with the dust of crushed masonry and the sweat of 10,000 horses. A man stands at the pulpit, not a holy imam in white robes, but a warrior clad in weather-beaten leather and iron. He looks down at the trembling elites of the Islamic world, merchants, scholars, and priests forced to their knees, and he smiles. "I am the punishment of God," he announces, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Outside, the sky is black with the smoke of a burning civilization. But inside the city, something far more terrifying than fire is happening. If you were a Mongol general standing at the back of that mosque, watching your Kagan, you would expect the order for a massacre. You are used to blood. You are used to the metallic tang of slaughter and the chaotic screams of a city being sacked. But Genghis Khan does not order chaos. He orders a list. He orders quills, ink, and parchment. What follows isn't a riot, but a sorting process so cold, so bureaucratic, and so industrialized that it chills your blood faster than the winter wind on the steppe. You realize then that the man you follow hasn't just conquered a city. He has weaponized the very concept of human value. This was the moment the world changed. This is a story of how a boy who once wore a wooden torture collar turned the entire continent of Asia into a machine of organized human trafficking, and why his system was so legally perfect that it legally justified the unjustifiable. To understand the machine, we must first understand the mechanic. We must travel back to the 1170s, to the desolate, wind-scoured steppes of Mongolia. Imagine the sensory deprivation of total darkness. A teenager named Temujin sits in the freezing mud. He cannot wipe the sweat from his brow. He cannot shiver without pain. His neck and wrists are locked into a heavy wooden kang, a mobile pillory designed for livestock. The rough wood has rubbed his skin raw, leaving festering sores that attract flies he cannot swat away. He is not a human being here. He is an object, a trophy. Every night, his captors drag him to a different tent to be mocked, a living symbol that his clan is broken. Most men in this position would break. They would scream until their voices gave out or retreat into madness. But Temujin is silent. He is watching through the slat of his wooden cage. He observes the guards. He smells the fermented mare's milk on their breath as they get drunk. He hears the slackening of discipline during the festival nights. He is learning the most dangerous lesson of his life. That power is not about strength. It is about leverage. When he finally makes his escape, striking the guard with his heavy wooden yoke and disappearing into the river reeds, he leaves his humanity behind in the mud. He emerges with a heart hardened like iron in a forge. But the wooden collar was only the second lesson. The first had been learned at age 9. His father, Yasuji, a powerful chieftain, was poisoned at a feast, a violation of the sacred laws of hospitality that left a metallic taste of betrayal in the young boy's mouth. What happened next was a masterclass in social brutality. The clan didn't mourn, they calculated. They looked at Temujin's mother, Holun, and her 5 starving children, and saw only dead weight. In the biting cold of the Mongolian winter, the very people who had sworn loyalty to his father packed up their yurts, mounted their horses, and rode away. Imagine the silence of the steppe as the hoofbeats faded. 9-year-old Temujin stood watching the horizon, realizing that tradition, loyalty, and blood bonds were lies people told themselves to feel safe. Holun kept him alive by digging for roots until her fingernails bled and trapping marmots in the rocky crags. They ate whatever they could find to stop the gnawing emptiness in their bellies. In those starving years, Temujin forged a new philosophy. The only law is survival, and the only crime is weakness. He vowed that if he ever gained power, he would build a system where betrayal was physically impossible. By 1206, the boy who hunted marmots had become the master of the steppe. Through decades of visceral, close-quarters warfare, Temujin united the warring tribes in a river of blood. At a great gathering called the Kurotai, under the fluttering white band of the 9 tails, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. But Genghis did not just want to rule people. He wanted to rewire their brains. He introduced the Yassa, a legal code that, on the surface, looked shockingly progressive to modern eyes. Historians often marvel at the text of the Yassa. It outlawed the kidnapping of women, a revolutionary act in a culture of bride theft. It declared all children legitimate, regardless of whether their mother was a wife or a concubine. It mandated religious freedom, allowing Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists to pray to their gods without fear of the sword. It even established a meritocracy, where a shepherd could rise to become a general if he had the tactical mind for it. It sounds like a utopia. It sounds like the boy who was enslaved wanted to end slavery. But you have to look closer. You have to read the fine print written in invisible ink. The Yassa was a circle. Inside the circle were the Mongols. Outside the circle was everyone else. The law that forbade enslaving a Mongol explicitly encouraged the enslavement of non-Mongols. The religious tolerance was only valid as long as the priests preached obedience to the Khan. Genghis Khan hadn't abolished the hierarchy. He had simply placed his people at the absolute peak and turned the rest of humanity into a resource to be harvested, processed, and consumed. The system was tested early by a governor named Kuchi, sent to manage the forest tribes of Siberia. Kuchi decided to indulge his vices. He began dragging women from their yurts to fill his personal harem, ignoring the local customs and causing unrest. When the tribes rebelled and killed him, Genghis Khan's reaction was chilling. He didn't mourn Kuchi, nor did he punish the tribes for killing a tyrant. He punished the tribes for creating disorder. He sent an army to crush them not because Kuchi was right, but because the rebellion disrupted the flow of tribute. The lesson was clear. Justice was a tool for stability, not a moral imperative. And then came Bukhara. The year is 1220. The Mongol army surrounds a jewel of the Islamic world. They do not just attack. They dismantle the geography. They divert a river to flood the city's defensive moat, turning the dry earth into a sucking quagmire. The walls crumble. When the citadel falls, the slaughter is efficient, but it is the aftermath that haunts the nightmares of history. This is where the generals saw the true face of the empire. The citizens of Bukhara were not killed randomly. They were herded into the squares and sorted like cattle at a market. Genghis Khan's administrators set up tables and opened their ledgers. They divided the weeping population into 4 distinct categories, a stratification of human life that was terrifyingly rational. Category 1, the artisans. If you could weave silk that shimmered like water, forge steel that could cut a hair in midair, or calculate the trajectory of a siege engine, you were saved. Your name was recorded. You were packed onto wagons and shipped thousands of miles to Karakoram, the Mongol capital. You were given food and shelter. But you were property. You belonged to the Khan. It was a golden cage, but a cage nonetheless. Category 2, the women and children. The young and beautiful were distributed like spoils of war, currency to reward loyal soldiers. Children were torn from their mothers' arms, not just to be servants, but to be erased, adopted into Mongol families. They were forced to forget their names, their gods, and their tongues, raising a generation of janissaries who knew only loyalty to their captors. Category 3, the useless, the elderly, the infirm, the scholars whose books were being burned in the mosques. They were simply erased from existence, their bodies left to return to the dust. But it was category for that truly displayed the demonic genius of Genghis Khan, the Hazar. This was the fate of the young, able-bodied men of Bukhara. They were not sold. They were not killed immediately. They were conscripted into labor battalions. In the next siege, these men would be forced to march in front of the Mongol army. They would carry the ladders to the walls of their own neighbors' cities. They would fill the moats with bundles of sticks and, eventually, with their own bodies. Imagine the psychological horror for the defenders of the next city. You look over your ramparts and see not a horde of foreign monsters, but your own cousins, your brothers, your trading partners, weeping as they are whipped forward to absorb your arrows. It broke the spirit of resistance before the first Mongol arrow even flew. It was psychological warfare, financed by the bodies of the conquered. The generals watching this realized that the Yassa, the law of the steppe, was a facade. It was a corporate structure designed to process humanity. One Persian historian wrote, "It was as if they were harvesting a crop, not fighting a war." This system didn't stop with Genghis. It became the DNA of the empire. When his grandson Hulagu sacked Baghdad in 1258, the waters of the Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed books and red with the blood of scholars, but the artisans were carefully plucked out and sent east. When Kublai Khan ruled China, He institutionalized these caste systems into the very fabric of the Yuan dynasty. The efficiency was staggering. The Mongol capital Karakorum rose from the dirt not by Mongol hands, but by the hands of kidnapped French goldsmiths, Chinese architects, and Persian weavers. It was a cosmopolitan metropolis built entirely on the back of global kidnapping. The trade routes, the famous Silk Road, became a conveyor belt for human talent, moved like chess pieces across a board that spanned the known world. So, how do we reconcile the two faces of Khan? In Mongolia today, he is the father of the nation, the man who brought law to the lawless. And this is true. Under his rule, a woman could carry a sack of gold from one end of the empire to the other unharmed. But the road she walked on was paved over the bones of millions who fell outside protection of the law. Genghis Khan teaches us a terrifying truth about civilization. Order can be just as monstrous as chaos. We tend to think of evil as a madman with a knife in a dark alley. But true, history-altering evil often wears the mask of a bureaucrat. It comes with forms to be signed, categories to be checked, and laws that justify the unthinkable. The generals who stood in the dust of Bukhara saw the future. They saw that if you make cruelty legal, organized, and profitable, men will not only participate in it, they will call it progress. As you look at the structures of power in our world today, ask yourself, where are the invisible lines drawn? Who is inside the circle of protection? And who is merely a resource waiting to be sorted? And while the dust settled over Bukhara, the machine was only just beginning to turn. Bukhara was a test case. What followed was the industrial application of the Yassa's dark logic. To understand the sheer magnitude of Genghis Khan's human trafficking operation, we must ride 400 miles west across the blistering Kizilkum Desert to the city of Samarkand. If Bukhara was a tragedy, Samarkand was a betrayal of the highest order. The city was defended by over 40,000 elite soldiers and a brigade of war elephants, tanks of the medieval world. The citizens felt secure behind their massive walls. But Genghis Khan did not rely on brute force. He relied on psychology of the category system we discussed earlier. He sent spies into the city, whispering rumors of what happened to those who resisted versus those who surrendered. The rumors were precise. The Khan needs artisans. He needs skilled men. Surrender and you enter the system. Fight and you enter the grave. The city's garrison, terrified by the news from Bukhara, surrendered on the third day. They opened the iron gates, expecting the mercy promised by the Yassa. Genghis Khan rode in, accepted their surrender, and then executed every single soldier of the garrison. Over 30,000 men. Why? Because according to his code, a soldier who betrays his own master to surrender without a fight cannot be trusted to be loyal to a new master. They were defective units. The civilians, however, were processed. This is where the numbers become staggering. In Samarkand alone, contemporary chroniclers record that 30,000 artisans were identified, cataloged, and shipped to Mongolia. Think about that number. 30,000 skilled professionals, doctors, astronomers, silversmiths, carpet weavers, vanished from the Islamic world in a single week. It was a brain drain so severe that the region's economy wouldn't recover for centuries. Another 30,000 men were conscripted into the Hazhar, the human shields. But the darkest chapter of this campaign was yet to be written. It happened at Urgench. Urgench was the capital of the Khwarezmian Empire, a metropolis of scholars and trade located on the Amu Darya River. The siege here was different. The defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew the sorting process was coming. They fought for every street, every house, every room. The Mongols, frustrated by the urban warfare which neutralized their cavalry, took heavy casualties. When the city finally fell after months of grinding combat, the Mongol discipline snapped. But even in their rage, they remained organized. They didn't just hack the population to pieces in a frenzy. They did the math. The chronicler Giovanni writes that the surviving population of Urgench was rounded up into a massive field outside the city walls. The artisans were separated first. Always the artisans first. They were sent east. The young women and children were separated next, sent to the slave markets of the Silk Road. Then, the soldiers looked at who was left, the useless population. There were approximately 50,000 Mongol soldiers present. According to the records, each soldier was assigned a quota. 24 humans. It was a grim administrative task. Each soldier had to execute 24 people before they could rest. This wasn't battle. It was a quota system. It was a bureaucratization of genocide. To ensure the job was done, the soldiers were required to cut off an ear from each victim and present them in sacks to their officers for counting. This is a reality of the Pax Mongolica that is often glossed over. The peace and trade that followed were built on a silence. The silence of cities where no dogs barked because there was no one left to feed them. But the system of enslavement wasn't just about labor or death. It was also about entertainment and the ultimate display of dominance. This brings us to the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223, a moment that terrified Europe. Genghis Khan's greatest generals, Geb and Subutai, were on a reconnaissance mission into what is now Russia and Ukraine. They encountered a massive coalition of Kievan Rus princes. The Rus forces were heavy cavalry, knights in chainmail, proud and noble, but they were disorganized. Subutai, using the feigned retreat tactic, lured them into a trap and annihilated them. After the battle, the surviving Rus princes and nobles surrendered, hoping for the ransom system common in European warfare. In Europe, if you captured a prince, you treated him well and sold him back to his family. It was a gentleman's agreement. But the Mongols did not play by these rules. To them, these princes were not noble. They were enemies who had killed Mongols. However, the Yassa had a specific law regarding nobility. One must not spill the blood of a noble on the ground. It sounds respectful, doesn't it? It sounds like a prohibition against killing. It was not. It was a challenge to kill them creatively, without shedding blood. The Mongol generals gathered the bound Russian princes. They laid them down on the ground in a row. Then, they placed heavy wooden planks on top of the living men. The Mongol generals and their officers then sat on top of these planks to hold their victory feast. As they ate their mutton and drank their fermented milk, discussing the logistics of their next campaign, the Russian princes beneath the floorboards were slowly crushed to death. This was the ultimate expression of the Mongol view of the other. The elite of a foreign civilization were literally reduced to furniture, to flooring for the Mongol conquerors. It was a message sent to the rest of the world. Your status, your crowns, and your bloodlines mean nothing to us. You are simply matter to be used. As the empire expanded, the capital city of Karakorum transformed. It became a bizarre cosmopolitan hub of enslaved talent. A French goldsmith named Guillaume Boucher was captured in Hungary and dragged thousands of miles to the Mongolian steppe. There, he built a massive silver fountain in the shape of a tree for the Khan's palace, which dispensed 4 different types of alcoholic drinks. Imagine the life of Guillaume. He is living in a yurt, surrounded by his Mongol masters, creating masterpieces of engineering. He meets an Englishman named Basil, also a slave. He meets a woman from Lorraine, France, named Paquette, who served the Khan's wife. These people, ripped from their homes in Europe, formed a strange, tragic expatriate community in the middle of nowhere. They were the lucky ones. They were the pets of the empire. But for every Guillaume Boucher, there were 100,000 nameless farmers whose bodies paved the roads of the Silk Road. The Mongol economy became entirely dependent on this influx of human capital. It was a predation economy. If the conquest stopped, the supply of slaves would stop and the economy would crash. This created a perpetual motion machine of war. They could not stop conquering, because the stop was to starve the system they had built. This dependency on slavery explains why the Mongols were so terrified of assimilation. They created strict laws preventing Mongols from settling down and becoming farmers. A Mongol who farmed was a Mongol who wasn't fighting. A Mongol who wasn't fighting wasn't capturing slaves. And a Mongol who wasn't capturing slaves was useless to the Khan. Genghis Khan's death in 1227 did not stop the machine. It accelerated it. His son Ogidi built a palace system that required even more labor. His grandson Batukin swept into Europe, depopulating nearly half of Hungary. In every instance, the sorting happened. The artisans went east, the miners went into the earth, and the useless went into the grave. It is estimated that during the reign of the Mongol Empire, the population of China dropped by tens of millions. The population of Persia fell from 2.5 million to 250,000. These aren't just war casualties. These are demographics hollowed out by systematic displacement and starvation caused by the removal of the labor force. When we look back at history, we often get distracted by the maps, the colors spreading across the globe. We say, look how big the empire was. But we rarely ask, who built the roads? Who mined the iron for swords? Who grew the grain that fed the horses? In the Mongol Empire, the answer was always the same. The people who were outside the circle of the Yassa, the people who had been sorted into the categories of the useful and the used. But the physical crushing of bodies was only one layer of the horror. The true genius of the Mongol system, the thing that allowed it to function for so long, was psychological. Genghis Khan didn't just enslave bodies. He enslaved minds by creating a hierarchy of despair. Imagine you are a captured potter from Persia, now living in the artisan district of Karakoram. You are a slave, yes. You cannot leave. You work 12 hours a day. But you look out your window and see the laborers hauling stone for the new palace. They are starving, beaten, their lifespans measured in seasons. You think, at least I am not them. Then, the laborer looks at the soldiers marching past. He sees a group of men, filthy, hollow-eyed, shuffling in chains toward the front lines. He knows they're the Hazar, the human shields destined to fill a moat with their own corpses so horses can cross. The laborer thinks, at least I am not them. This tiered system destroyed solidarity. The artisan didn't rebel because he feared becoming a laborer. The laborer didn't rebel because he terrified of becoming a shield. The slaves policed themselves. They informed on each other to protect their meager status. It was a prison without walls, built entirely on the terror of demotion, and the wealth it generated was obscene. We often picture the Mongols as rugged nomads living simply in tents. By the mid-13th century, the Mongol elite were dripping in gold. A single successful campaign could net a general thousands of slaves. These weren't just servants. They were liquid assets. They could be sold, traded for horses, or gifted to secure political alliances. The Silk Road, often romanticized as a highway of spices and silk, was, in reality, a conveyor belt of human trafficking. A blacksmith captured in Baghdad might be sold to a master in Beijing. A Russian fur trapper might end up tending horses in Iran. It was the first truly globalized labor force, and it was entirely involuntary. The scariest part? It worked. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was real. You could arguably walk from the Black Sea to the Pacific Ocean with a golden plate on your head and not be robbed. But that peace was the silence of a graveyard. It was order maintained by the absolute certainty of violence. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his body was carried back to Mongolia in secret. Legend says that every living thing the funeral procession encountered, human or animal, was killed to keep the location of his grave a mystery. But while the man died, the machine he built did not. His sons and grandsons didn't dismantle the slavery system. They industrialized it. In Russia, the Golden Horde, the Mongol state that ruled for centuries, institutionalized a harvest. They demanded tribute from Russian princes, not just in silver, but in people. For nearly 500 years, the steppes of Central Asia became a black hole for human life, sucking in captives from the Slavic lands, the Caucasus, and Persia. This system of raiding and enslavement persisted long after the Mongol Empire collapsed, continuing in various forms right up until Russian conquest of the 19th century. That is a 600-year legacy of organized human trafficking, all tracing its DNA back to the Yassa of Genghis Khan. So, how do we judge him? History loves a binary. We want Genghis Khan to be either the great unifier who created the modern world or the bloodthirsty barbarian who destroyed it. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. He was both. By the standards of his own people, he was a hero. He brought laws, literacy, and meritocracy to the steppe. He stopped the endless tribal wars. He protected Mongol women. He was a visionary. But he achieved this by declaring that anyone outside the tribe was a resource to be consumed. This isn't just ancient history. It is a mirror. The logic Genghis Khan used, progress for us, exploitation for them, is the same logic used by every empire that followed. The British Empire spoke of the rule of law while starving India. The American founding fathers wrote, All men are created equal while owning slaves. The Nazis built the Autobahn and social welfare programs while operating death camps. Genghis Khan didn't invent this hypocrisy. He just stripped away the pretense. He didn't hide it behind religion or civilization. He codified it in cold, hard law. The boy who wore the slave's yoke didn't grow up to break the wheel. He grew up to become the wheel. And as the generals stood in the ruins of Bukhara, watching the sorting of human souls, they realized the most terrifying lesson of all. A system doesn't have to be moral to be effective. It just has to be efficient. If you want to understand how power truly works, don't look at the statues of conquerors. Look at the ledgers of the accountants standing behind them. Please like and subscribe my YouTube channel History Quest Archives for more video.